a number of things, one of which is what I call our epistemological challenge. Epistemology is a fancy word for simply the study of knowledge, its origin, its scope, and its limits. If you take that in college, you're wasting your time because it's usually part of the philosophy department, and all they do is massage different definitions of words without dealing at all with tools of how to deal with the understanding what's really true as we try to explore our reality. And so I want to start, when I do this kind of a talk, I usually walk in wearing these beads. But I usually do it just to freak out the sponsors. What have they done here? But I want to talk about these beads before we start, because I want to give you an IQ test. Now, the way this all came about is I have a little craft workshop where I do models and things, and I spilled on the floor a whole jar of these black and white beads. So as I picked them up, I decided I didn't want that to happen again, so I just picked them up at random and put them on this thread, and so that they now have integrity. I could take a few off that I need or whatever. Except after I picked them up off the floor, I was startled to notice something. Because as I looked at it, anybody here radio hams that know Morse code? Hey, there we go. Okay. Well, I noticed there's did it, and then da dit. Did it is I, and da dit is in. It's the word in. Then there was a dash, which is by itself, that's a T. And then there's 4 dots, that's an H. And then there's a single dot, E. In the. Then there's a B, E, and a G, I, in the beginning. And to get right through it, I was stunned to discover that in Morse code, we have in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth in Morse code. And that all happened by random accident. I picked these off the floor randomly and put them on that thread, and they just came out that way by accident. How many believe me? How many are accusing me of being a liar? The liars have it. You obviously, if I try to tell you that happened by accident, you know I'm pulling your leg. You know that I'm kidding. If I had better delivery, I could make the whole thing humorous, but you get the idea. Okay. So the probability that this happened by accident is, as far as you're concerned, absurd. It's not a 50-50 chance. It's something far greater than that, right? Well, did this happen by chance or by design? I want you to ponder that for a moment. There are 347 beads on this string. Now, there's only 2 types of beads, a black and a white. So I have an alphabet of 2. I have 347 of them, right? So the probability of getting any specific sequence is 1 chance in 2 raised to the 347th power. Or putting it another way, it's 2.8669 times 10 with 104 zeros after it. That is a very big number. In other words, that is really unlikely. I'm going to try to get across to you how unlikely that really is. From your own instincts, without having studied advanced statistics or anything, you knew in your heart of hearts that I was pulling your leg with my little story. But if you have some mathematical sophistication, you can quickly realize the probability of any specific sequence there is absurdly unlikely. There is a law in physics called Borel's law. There are often functions in mathematics that become asymptotic to some other value. For example, it gets very close. It never crosses 0, but it gets closer and closer and closer forever. There's a point in mathematics where you have to have a cutoff, where you say that enough's enough, that's sufficient. They call that Borel's law. And any probability with 10 with 50 zeros after it is defined as absurd. Any probability that is more rare than one chance in 10 with 50 zeros after it is defined as absurd. There's a point at which you need to cut off. Okay, so that's called Borel's law. See, I want to sensitize you to something else. When you talk about, we're talking about information here. And one of the most the frontier of every science today, the frontier is in the field of information sciences. Whether it's biology or physics or anything, the information sciences turn out to be one of the newest but the most cutting-edge sciences. To understand something about information itself, you need to understand there are two extremes that you have to be aware of. You can have something very disordered or very orderly. If it's very disordered, we can call it, if it's sound, we call it noise. If it's orderly, it may just be a signal. It's a word we're listening for or whatever, okay? And music is orderly. If it's disordered, it's cacophony. Now, I'm not going to talk about today's modern music, but you get the idea, okay? There's a term called chaos, which is the ultimate form of chaos, confusion and disorder. It's called chaos in mathematics. Under order, cosmos implies, that's a Greek term, comes from a Greek term, meaning orderly, okay? To bring order out of chaos is what the word cosmos means. That's the root word for cosmetics, to bring order out of chaos. You girls are going to let me get away with that, huh? Okay, let's go. The point I'm trying to get across, on the left we have various forms of randomness. The fancy word for the left side is entropy. Entropy is just the technical term for what you and I think of as randomness. At the right end is when things are orderly, it takes energy and design to make it orderly. There is a basic trend of going from information on the right to entropy on the left. The path of just circumstances, those are opposites, first of all. That's I want you to get across the idea. Information and entropy are opposites. Entropy is total absence of information, okay? If you're an engineer trying to design a communication system, your warfare, you're trying to improve the signal-to-noise ratio. You want to get as much signal and as little noise as possible. And that's also true no matter what you're doing. You're trying to get orderly in here. The path intrinsically is always to the left. You spend a Saturday morning cleaning up the garage. How long does it stay that way? A month later, where is it? The hall closet, your locker in school. You spend energy getting it all straightened out, but as time just goes on, it turns to entropy. That's true everywhere in the world, except one place, and I'll come to that. So the information sciences, there are this whole concept of randomness. I'm using that term because it's more familiar rather than the word entropy. One thing that most of us that have had any math in school may not realize it, but we've been taught in what's called deterministic processes. 2 plus 2 is 4, always. 2 is 2, and I'd say 2 plus 3, and it's 5. I mean, that's deterministic. And there is another field of mathematics that deals with what they call stochastic processes. These are processes that include a random variable. The height of a person. If you're talking about something stranger, you don't know how tall he is. He's likely to be more than 4 feet and less than 7, but he's somewhere in there, right? That's a stochastic variable. So if you can use that in the equation and know that's within certain bounds, it may have certain distributions, you're dealing with numbers that are not deterministic, they're stochastic. Okay. That leads to a discussion called pseudo-random numbers. It may shock you to discover that it's almost impossible to obtain a random number. If you're a scientist that you need a random number for some reason, you've got a challenge before yourself. Back when I was in the Rand environment, in 1955, the granddaddy think tank of them all, the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, they published a book called 1 Million Random Digits with 100,000 Normal Deviates. Now, the average layman would look at that and laugh. You know, you open that book. That's literally, I was going to bring one, but it's bulky. You open it up, and it's just lists and lists and lists of random numbers. And if you're a naive, untaught civilian, you look at that and you laugh because you think that's ridiculous. Someone paid good money for a bunch of random numbers. No. It turns out it took the most advanced computer arts of that day to generate this product to have some assurance that they really were random. What do I mean by that? The Rand Corporation had access to the most powerful computers of that day, and they made sure that these numbers had no symmetry, had no predictability, had no patterning, that they washed them to make sure they were truly random. No evidence of design anywhere. And in its day, it was a useful tool for certain kinds of scientists and certain kinds of laboratories that needed a supply of random numbers. Turns out if you need random numbers, you got a problem because almost any procedure you use to get one isn't really random. It may look like a random. That's why a proper term is it's a pseudo-random number. But to have a source of random numbers turns out in certain fields of study to be essential for certain experimental situations. And so this book was a tool, a serious tool for serious scientists at that time. And even today in a computer, one of the most complicated things it does is to provide you with a random number. It also will be technically a pseudo-random number because it will be a result of some process, which means it isn't really random. And there's tests for randomness, but the tests really mean there's no predictability. There's no patterning. They're not symmetric. It's not, not an even number of odds and evens, except in some large sample and so forth. And so that's not as trivial as it sounds. I'm going through this to get across to you how the defining characteristic of a collection of random numbers is what? The total absence of design. I want to get that across to you because we live in a culture that astonishingly attributes design to randomness. Design in nature is treated as random. We were all the result of a cosmic accident. It's astonishing to realize we live in a culture, in our science and in our psychology, in our schools, whatever, that has ruled out the concept of design as being a source of anything. It attributes that to randomness. That's what the theory of evolution is, an attempt to ascribe. Here we are, we encounter ourselves as the most elegant designs on the planet Earth, and we attribute those designs to nothingness, to absence, to randomness. I want you to understand the absurdity of that and the difficulty of thinking intellectuals that are career-bound in an environment in which if they speak of intelligent design in nature and so forth, they jeopardize their careers. You need to understand that.